a work stream that our organization had been involved in for many years, that sort of started with um, making it possible for people who live in wildfire prone areas to be able to shop easier, keep their insurance, or replace their insurance when they get dropped. We solidified this initiative and gave it a title. It stands for Wildfire Risk Reduction and Asset Protection, WRAP, which is sort of, we tried to roll in the goal of helping people um, reduce risk, but also keep their homes protected. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Amy Bach, and I'm the executive director of the organization, one of the co-founders. And I'm joined here with by a couple of our staff, Emily Rogan and Val Brown, and then one of our board members, Sue Piper. And then a lot of really outstanding professionals, too numerous now to go through. If I go through introducing everybody, we're going to be halfway through our meeting, which is a blessing. So Emily, thank you for preparing the agenda. And actually, I left out another important person, Joel Loucher, who had been with the Department of Insurance for many, many moons in their head of their rate regulation bureau and special deputy as well. And Joel is joining us as a, he's doing some part-time work with United Policyholders since he just retired from the department. So those are that's the UP, that's the team up piece here. But I consider everybody who is who's dialed in today in some level to be part of what we call team up, which is just a very broad label for anyone who has buy-in with our mission of educating and advocating for insureds and solving problems together. And in this context, we're all here to try to solve the same problem of the wildfire risk that property owners in California face. The overall interest that we all have in incentivizing, stimulating, facilitating risk reduction, home hardening, and also the insurance piece. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to help us move this along. And just just a reminder that the whole purpose for which we started the WRAP group was to first and foremost identify try to reach some sort of an agreement on a set of standards that it will become official in some way, either by regulation or by legislation, or even by our own. If we decide we want to just put out a report or a manifesto and just say this is what we say the standards should be, that's kind of our first goal. Because it's become obvious to us, having been working now for many years to try to strike the right balance between insurers' freedom to sell, to pick their customers as they see fit, but then the fact that consumers they don't have a choice. If you have a mortgage, right, you have to buy it, and B, we want people to keep their homes insured. So as climate change has made the market less appealing to insurers and more risky for homeowners and property owners, the imperative for those of us who want to move forward to establish in California a statewide wildfire risk reduction and insurance reward program. This is a vehicle that we have created. It's not the only vehicle. The insurance Department of Insurance has got their own work stream. We are sort of trying to merge them. And I know each of you, almost every one of you, has your own work stream, but we all share the goal. So again, just to bring it back, what we're still trying to do is make that list. And with that in mind, I wanted to give Bryant Henley a chance to speak for a few minutes. The agenda that Emily shared, the next item is the CDI hearing update. I know that Bill Tyler, who's a very important part of our work here, was one of the witnesses at a previous hearing the department did, which we talked about on our last meeting. And of course, United Policyholders also provided testimony, and we are looking forward to supporting the department in their parallel track. So Bryant, Special Deputy Counsel to the Commissioner Lara, thank you so much for joining us, Brian. If you can just give us cliff notes on your work stream at the department that parallels ours.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, Amy, thank you to United Policyholders, and greetings to all of you. Really thrilled to be able to be part of this meeting, and also really thrilled about what United Policyholders has been working to achieve here. I think as all of you who have followed any of what we've done at the department, you will find that we agree that in terms of home hardening standards, mitigation standards, whether it's for a community or individual homes, we hear from homeowners all the time about the fact that there are no uniform standards, and when you talk to one insurance carrier or one particular, if you talk to like CAL FIRE, for example, you may get different answers in terms of what the standards are that should be considered for. And so we fully support United Policyholders' goal of consolidating those standards. So just a shout out and thank you to United Policyholders for being an important and proactive partner in pursuing that goal. And that ties in kind of nicely, I think, to what I was invited to speak about here. So, and Amy, cut me off if I go on too long. I'll try to be at the Cliff Notes level here.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we, for those of you who were able to join, and even if you weren't, there's still plenty of opportunity to view a recording of our hearing we held on October 19th. This was a virtual hearing, of course, and the hearing really was focused on insurance availability and affordability in California in light of wildfires and the increase with which we have seen wildfires throughout our state. So we had a number of wonderful speakers. I see some of them here in the audience right now, and really thought we had a really robust and great discussion with the public about the challenges that homeowners have seen from the perspective of the homeowner, from the perspective of firefighters and those who are kind of on the front line, so to speak, and looking at these issues, and also from the perspective of insurers and consumer advocates in terms of how do we make sure that homeowners insurance especially remains available to the public in all parts of our state, especially the wildland urban interface. So a really wonderful, robust discussion, but for those of you who attended, it was a long discussion. It took a little over 4 hours to complete. And that was with every person who wanted to speak getting only 5 minutes to talk. So it was just the only way we could do that for a virtual session. This next session that we're holding on December 10th, which Amy invited me to talk about today, it's going to be a little different. And again, it's with the recognition that it is so hard to get as much public comment, oral comment in a virtual setting. So we have, for this piece, the focus is really going to be to take what we've learned, what we've heard from the public, what we've heard from fire chiefs, insurers, and other specialists, as well as consumer advocates, and focus on one of the themes we've heard for a long time now. California's insurance rate making process, the way it generally works for most lines of insurance, is we allow insurers to forecast their future risk of loss by looking backwards and looking at their prior loss history. And by and large, for most lines of insurance, that has been a tried and true technique for insurers and rate making in general. So if you have automobile accidents in 1 year, you can generally expect the similar amount of accidents and volume in the next year. What the criticism has been about that plan as it applies to homeowners insurance is that insurers often say, look, homeowners insurance is different. We think you can't rely on history to decide what future risk is for homeowners insurance. And insurers have been pretty loud in advocating that the department change its rate making formula to allow for statistical, it's called stochastic modeling, but I mean, to boil it down, it's really it's a method of modeling to predict future losses based on statistics and looking at what the probable losses might be in different regions of the state based on statistical data and algorithms that try to project or imagine how growth might exist in terms of wildfire risk in different regions of the state. So these generally what we call catastrophe models. Insurers would like for the department to include in its rate-making formula catastrophe models. And Commissioner Latta has said that he's open to considering that. The questions, of course, are really fundamentally what is in it for the consumer. So the commissioner has teed up a discussion on December 10th. The idea is really to get to two high-level themes. First, how, if at all, would the use of catastrophe modeling in rate making help to make insurance, homeowners insurance specifically, more available and affordable for homeowners? That's the first question. And secondly, just as important and really ties in nicely to this WRAP initiative, is how can wildfire mitigation reduce the spread and risk of future wildfires? So if we're talking about models, the Commissioner Latta has made it clear, let's talk about them, but let's talk about it in terms of what's in it for the consumer and how are you, insurance industry, going to give more appreciation and recognition of home and community hardening efforts. So just to kind of wrap it up, Amy, because I want to make sure I don't take up too much time, I want to say that on December 10th, all of you who have an opportunity, we would love for you to join. We'll have a link on our website, and there's an opportunity to go on our website now to register if you'd like to attend and view the event. It's going to be an event where we have roughly 12 to 14 experts that are going to have some limited amount of time to talk about these very issues, these two questions I talked about. So we have selected our experts who will be speaking, and we would love for all of you to participate and view the discussion as these experts do describe the answers to these questions, how modeling might work in California with the consideration of homeowners availability and affordability, and two, how can mitigation be recognized in these models? So please do come. There is going to be an opportunity for all of the public to then comment after the event on December 10th. And we really look forward to comments from public advocates, from United policyholders and all stakeholders to react to what they hear on the December 10th event. So that's, to wrap it up, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to give a smaller group of experts an opportunity to have more of a dialogue in this pandemic environment. And the best way we can do that is a virtual meeting that everybody can view together, hearing these experts speak. And then after the hearing, having an opportunity for all of the public to submit written comments about their thoughts on what they've heard. So it will be recorded if you can't attend on December 10th, and there will always be an opportunity to view it afterwards. And we look forward to your comments and hopefully your attendance at the hearing. So let me pause there, Amy. I don't want to take up too much time, but hopefully that gives a good cliff notes of what we plan to do. And I'm happy to take questions or do anything else that might be helpful.
What website can we find that information on?
Absolutely. Thank you. So,
I'm
yes,
sorry, I missed that. Did somebody ask a question while I was unmuting? I
Yeah.
thought I heard. Anyway, thank you.
I heard Amy, I heard a question about the website. If I could, I'll just answer.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yes. So, yeah, thank you for the question. So our website is www.insurance.ca.gov. G-O-V. I'll put it in the group chat so you can access it. And there will be a button that you can click on December 10th to stream the event either live or as a recording. So stay tuned for that. And I'll put it in the chat function there.
So I definitely would love to give folks about 5 minutes to ask some questions of Brian. And before I do, I just want to clarify for those of you who have sort of or are more on the fire side and less on the insurance side, we really have two threads going here from what Brian was talking about. We have the thread that was from the earlier hearing, heavily focused on how do we get insurers to recognize and reward mitigation, or what kind of ways could we force insurers to recognize and reward that, and versus the ways we've tried that have not worked so far of sort of forcing them or trying to get legislation through to force them. So we're trying to there's that thread. But the model thread, just so that those of you who are not really in the insurance world, just what we're talking about, what the department is talking about is that traditionally, as Bryant said, rate making has been based on historic data on what's happened in the past, what happened with the weather, what do we know about what's already gone down, and modeling, at least in this context, is there is a developing business sector of companies. They are scientists and business people, and they sell models to insurance companies. There are different kinds of models. There are underwriting related, meaning here's a way for you to figure out, looking at data, who's going to be a good customer for you. But then there's also predictive modeling about events, and that is what we're talking about here. We're talking about the business, the scientist driven businesses that sell models to insurance companies, saying, if you use our model and then you incorporate our model into your decisions about who you're going to sell insurance to and what you're going to charge them, and what you have to charge them, you'll be more profitable than your competitor, for example. That would be sort of a sales pitch that a risk modeler would make to an insurance company. Our gadget, our fancy bells and whistles that our smart people developed are going to help you make more money. That's kind of the boiled down essence, right? And the tension that regulators have, and this is playing out nationally and in California, is that a lot of it is non-traditional rate making. It is a lot of the agencies like the California department that are very consumer focused and very diligent, have been very reluctant to allow these business science tools to sort of swamp traditional rate making, which is based on what we know went down. And for consumer advocates like myself and our organization, that is a source of great worry, because we worry. I often use the image of a volume knob on an amplifier, on a radio, let's say. We worry that the sellers, the business scientist sellers of these models, their target client is the insurance company, right? So they want the insurance company to like their product. And what we worry about, and what I think the Department of Insurance worries about as well, and why the department has been saying, no, we're sticking to traditional rate making, is that the dials can be turned by the business that's selling this tool to turn and make the risk look like it's higher, which justifies a higher rate. And that's the core of why we've been so nervous, as we being the consumer advocates, is that these models have, some people say they look like black boxes, we don't know what's in them. Some people say, they're not, nobody has a crystal ball. And at the end of the day, it's probably like everything else. There's probably a lot of value in some aspects of the models, and that's exactly what the department is trying to ferret out. Is that a fair assessment, would you say, Bryant?
Absolutely. It is the tug of war between, the unknown and what these models might do, and the dial analogy you give, Amy, I think is a good one. Those are the concerns we have, but we're open to exploring how they can help consumers with availability of insurance.
Right. And maybe Joel, if you want to shed light for a minute, and I swear we will open up to questions, but what is the nexus between a model and a mitigation discount? Is there a connection, and what is it?
I don't think there's really a nexus there, right? The model is helping an insurer develop its overall rate, right? If they use the model is what would project the average annual loss from a catastrophe. That would be loaded into the insurer's rates. So, but you can see it as kind of loaded in on a kind of just into the total number of dollars the insurer could charge. But when the insurer then puts its rating plan into play, that's what determines what each consumer would pay. So, they're going to charge overall their 1,000 insureds, they're going to charge them $1 million. Who pays more and who pays less? Who pays more is based on that model that scores the home and says that your home is a higher risk score. So it's the distribution of that model. And of course, if one of these stochastic models that Brian's talking about ups the number of dollars that the insurer is going to add into its overall rate, generally those additional dollars are going to be paid for by that same end of the spectrum, the higher risk scores from those score modelers.
Right.
And so, they thought it was already expensive. It could get more expensive. And, of course, beyond the black box issue that, there's the concern you mentioned about whether they're trying to please the insurers who might say, I'm willing to write some of those risks if I can charge them $1 million each,
Right.
So, and then they could say, oh, I'm offering insurance, but,
Right.
Doesn't really help anybody.
So, okay. So, and for those who are wondering, well, isn't a Fireline score, isn't that a model? There are some models that are being used. We're talking about allowing insurers to the Fireline score is an underwriting tool where the insurers it's not a rating tool, right? So what we're really talking about is a model, a rate setting model, right? Ryan, is that a fair?
Right. Yeah. I doubt absolutely there are different types of models, and this is where it can get tricky. What Joel has been describing, what I've been describing, and what we'll talk about on December 10th are these so-called stochastic models, which look at the overall rate of the company and look at the average annual loss. But separate and apart from those, what I'm calling stochastic models or catastrophe models, there are definitely also models that are Fireline scores and where you can segment out risks based on different scores for different homes in different regions. Those types of models are not the types of models we'll be discussing on December 10th, but they are indeed a rating tool that insurers use to with more granularity to decide what amount to price each home in different regions of the state. And the last thing I just want to say is, I really do hope people tune in, because I think you'll hear some interesting stories about these stochastic overall models, the catastrophe models. We have one particular modeling firm that will be speaking to how they actually do use mitigation and incorporate mitigation into their latest methods for modeling against these disasters. So I think the message you will hear, and I hope you take away from the 10th, on December 10th, is that, yeah, home hardening does work, that it does matter, mitigation does matter, and these models are finally slow, but coming to recognize the importance of home hardening.
Right. And so I think this is perfect to tie it all together, is that the idea here is that those of us who've been on this fight for many years, Rosemary and a number of you that are on the call, we've been trying to, when we're trying to, look at, well, are insurers, are they even looking at what people are, the successful programs that are in place, in different communities, are they factoring those in, or are they completely ignoring them? And so I think there's a sort of a general understanding that we may be able to better accomplish our goal of having communities and property owners be rewarded for being proactive with with home hardening through, in some way, with models as some aid. In other words, that if the model, I remember having this whole discussion about, are they looking at the counties that have seasonal firefighting resources only, and are they just are they dinging those counties too hard, that kind of thing, right? If our insurers, so it brings us right back to the baseline that this group is trying to establish. So with that, I'm going to give us 5 minutes if there are questions from the group for Bryant that you or Joel specifically about the upcoming hearing.
And Amy, I did see some in the chat too. I don't know if you want to take them.
Yes, okay, I see here. Let's see. I've got from Charles Brooks. Hi, Charles. Is there discussion of accumulating California after incident data and making available to risk modelers to include for modeling mitigation efforts? Do either of you want to answer that?
I have one comment, is that rates themselves or an insurer's rating plan only will reflect differences in rate for things where the insurer collects the data. So, for an insurer to charge a difference between a wood shake roof and a more fire resistive composite roof, the insurer needs to have a data point to collect that data so that it can compare losses between those two types of roofs. And I think this is going to be one of the first steps forward we're going to need, is to have insurers collect more specific data about homes. So Amy, you did mention whether they have a volunteer or seasonal fire department. That is something measured already, right? Because you do get a protection class, is data that insurers collect. So they compare losses by protection class, which is your fire department types and resources. Mm-hmm. And that's measured. Roof types are measured, but a lot of the things that I think we're going to talk about for a mitigated home may not be measured at this time. And that's going to be a step we'll need. And the modelers will need that data too. The stochastic modelers will need that. And we know that right now, like a fire line score does not take that into account, anything about the home. And so it's going to be, a lot of this is going to be about identifying the features that we think are meaningful in making a difference on fire loss, and then starting to collect that data to prove, our assumptions, and then charging a difference or allowing coverage to people because we know they're a lower risk.
Right.
So it is about gathering data.
Okay, and then we have a question from FireSafe Sonoma. How broad or granular are the modeling tools? You kind of just answered that. Well, go ahead, if you want to, either of you want to.
Well, I just say they do, Bryant mentioned even the stochastic models, they are looking at a particular insurer's book of business and projecting this is what your average annual loss will be. If they look at that business, they're looking at all the breakdowns and different differentials that insurer has. Do you write a lot of business in a protection class 10, in territory 56, wood frame, age of home, all that stuff, and making that prediction. So they are granular, but they're granular based on the current measurements that insurers use, which hasn't included mitigation data generally.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I could just add briefly to that. I agree with what Joel said. I would submit that the better modelers are the ones that are working harder to get that granularity, right? So I think it's always been the goal of modelers to not just do the high level losses, but they've always said our models are going to be better with the data we collect. So to Joel's point, the models are only as good as the data that's input into them. And I think it's really fascinating. And again, why I hope you can attend and listen to the discussion on December 10th. You're going to hear from some modelers who say, look, we now use geocoding, we use satellite imagery, we use some of these other tools that are available to us so we can get down to a smaller level of viewing of a property, the vegetation around the property. But of course, then that raises the question, you might see the vegetation, but what about the home itself? What do you know about how the home was built? So you're going to hear some interesting discussions from modelers about how they tackle those issues, because to Joel's point, it is true, many insurers have acknowledged that they haven't done a tremendous job of collecting data on each particular home's characteristics. And to make matters even more challenging, to do those inspections, whether it's CAL FIRE or other fire representatives inspecting each home, it costs money, and it is very difficult to do a home by home inspection. But with technology, those challenges are starting to become surmountable, and you're seeing with the advent of mobile devices and the ability to photograph your property, some ways that we might be able to do a better job of inspecting homes without physically sending people out to each and every home. So I'll stop there, Amy. I know there are other questions, and I don't want to take up too much time.
No, this is a fantastic discussion. So what we're going to do, our 5 minutes, we're going to move on. If there's another question, please put it in the chat, and if we get to it, we will. We have another really MVP on here. We have a couple MVPs. We're going to hear a little bit from later on. Jim Webster with Wildfire Partners is on to answer some questions, and then we also have Daniel Gorham from the IBHS, the Institute for Home and Business Safety, which I'm hoping, Daniel, that you'll be a presenter on our next call. But for our next agenda item is we're going to hear a little recap from Emily Rogan about a survey that we have had open now for quite a while. And you know, just to bring it back to like, what are we really doing here? Well, obviously we're trying to help first and foremost solve a crisis in California in the short term that is really hurting a lot of people in rural and suburban areas. And then we're also trying to pave the way for a healthier marketplace in the future and all that. But in the here and now, there's still a lot of people that are getting dropped and getting slammed and, you know, having to go to the FAIR plan. And so Emily, we had opened up a couple, I guess, how long have we had this going, Emily, the survey?
So we have opened, we opened it in February of 2019. So it's almost open for 2 years. And I am going to be sharing some interim results, which means that it's still open, but what we are seeing is the results that I grabbed from a 1 year period. So 12 months from December 2019 to December 1st, 2020 today. And just taking a look at what this actually means for people. So we asked quite a few questions. It was a 13 question survey, and I'm only going to be picking out a few here. One of the important things we want to see is how would you describe where your home is located? That allows us to drill down by the different areas, but as you can see, it's an issue in, besides urban areas, in almost every other type of area, people are facing this issue. Also, I wanted to say that what you're seeing here are just people who have been dropped by their insurance company. As anyone who's done a survey, you always get random people who will also take your survey, but we create the survey so that we can parse out and really just get the data that we want of the population that we're looking for. So what reasons were given to you for being dropped by your home insurance company? Location of the home was the #1 answer that people gave. As you can see, the age of the home, no one from this survey had their insurance company tell them that age of the home was the reason. Very low numbers for brush, but when we also include an other please specify, because sometimes you will find people will not understand the options. So we do see in other please specify that there was both like zip code or wildfire danger or recent wildfire activity was one of the things that they had mentioned. So wildfires did come up in the other please specify open-ended answer. But I think it's important to see how consumers are translating what reasons their insurance companies are giving them. The next question we ask is, did your insurance company ask you to make specific improvements in order to keep your policy? Was there something you could have done in order to keep your policy? 92% said no. So that when their insurance gave them notice, there was nothing that they could, that they said that, oh, if you replace this or if you clear this, then 92% of people were given no action items to be able to keep their insurance. And then what is the name of your current home insurance company? So this is the second question to a pairing. What is the name of the company that dropped you? And then what is the name of your current home insurance company? So this is who picked up your coverage. Fair Plan, pretty big there, 36%. And then also another, in other please specify if it wasn't an option that we listed. And in the word cloud you see at the very bottom, those were the most common answers that people gave. So obviously, like still shopping, that's one of them, but you can see that there were, few in the open-ended questions as well. And then how did switching insurance affect your cost? So 86% of people said that it increased the cost. And then again, we asked by how much, and that is the word cloud that you see at the bottom. So we're talking thousands of dollars. And, I just want to remind everyone that when we're talking about keeping home insurance affordable and available, with affordable, we're not saying it should be at a low cost. We're saying that people can literally afford to keep the coverage. And when your insurance increases, maybe you see anywhere from 1,000 all the way up to 4,000, 5,000. Those numbers, the size means again, the size, the bigger the font, the more common the answer was. So while it is across the board, when you're talking about a $300, $400, $500, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 increase a year, that can, become unaffordable. And then I just wanted to end with that, we do offer people resources. It's not just gathering information, that we do have lots of publications on our website to help people understand what to do if they're dropped, what the California Fair Plan is, what a difference in condition policy is, our matchup insurance finder, and then also we did a webinar 2 times this year of how to survive the underinsurance crisis. So that is the short presentation. We will be pulling it together for a report, likely when it's been either at the end of this year or for the full 2 years of the survey. And this is the second time that we have done this. We did a survey starting in 2017 as well. So 17 to 19, 19 to 21. And we'll be tightening up our survey again, because as we're gaining more information and seeing the results, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to say, okay, this is great, but we didn't ask this question, and this will really gear us in to have solid data on how this is affecting people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. All right, so and just so everybody knows, we did not advertise this survey. It's just a link from our landing page, and we mention it, but we didn't do some sort of big outreach. So this is very organic, real data from people who came to us for a reason. So the next item on our agenda is National Advocacy on Mitigation at the NAIC, Regulator Approaches and Success Stories. And what I wanted to do here was just to let the group know that that United Policyholders has been long before we formed the RAP, this RAP group. We had and even before we were involved with insurance subgroup of the governor's task force on tree mortality, through whom we connected with a lot of you. I had been working with regulators at the national level to understand what other states have done to establish mitigation programs and insurance incentives, rewards type programs. And so I had done a couple of co-presentations with the Insurance Department of Alabama and South Carolina, both of whom were, a lot of these states sort of were ahead of us because they had, their markets had crashed, or their home insurance markets had gotten very weak. Competition had gotten very weak in areas that had been hit by hurricanes. So there were some parallels. So we wanted to learn from those states what they had to do to, either through legislation or collaboration with insurers, to say, okay, if you do X, you will get Y reward. And so there's a lot to be learned from other states, but the problem really with looking at all that, and I want to, well, the problem with looking at all that, and all that includes a tax, a couple of these states implemented tax breaks, so you could write off your mitigation investment. Some of these states have a mandate that insurers recognize and in some way home hardening, but didn't prescribe exactly how they have to recognize. Some states actually, by legislation, even put a specific, some specific numbers in the the recognition must have the form of X discount type of a thing. And in all those programs, the Institute for Home and Business Safety was an integral part of how they measure, or how they said, looked at what techniques are effective. Okay, so what I'd like to do, so I gave you a little background that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, but in a way we do, because wildfires are different, and they're different from hurricanes, they're different from earthquakes. I mean, all weather events have certain outliers and things that are, you can't, Superstorm Sandy, Frankenstorm, crazy kind of weather phenomena that people had never seen before. We have that now with fires, right? Tornadoes in the middle of fires. You ask Chief Tyler and a lot of, Chief Lowenthal, whatever, they'll tell you, I thought I was an expert on fire. I've seen stuff that I had never seen before. So there's some parallels, but the bottom line is, I'd like to hear from Daniel with IBHS. And Daniel, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but if you could just give us a really thumbnail on where IBHS is on modeling wildfires, on testing the effect of fire on the fake structures that you guys build, and just kind of maybe just a very brief, again, cliff notes on, well, so you can tell people who you are in case there's anybody who doesn't know who you are. And I'll tell everyone, they're funded by the insurance industry. And there's no mystery about that, but the work, there's no one doing exactly what they're doing. Obviously, lots of other entities, CAL FIRE does testing. And somebody wrote in the chat that Dan Turner shared that Cal Poly's WUI Fire Institute is working on a very granular fire hazard risk model. But Daniel, thank you again for joining us. And I had a great conversation with Roy Wright a couple weeks ago. Roy now runs the Institute for Home and Business Safety, but had been the head of the National Flood Insurance Program. So he's no stranger to challenging missions. So Daniel, thanks again for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and thanks all for an invitation to join. Yeah, pleasure to participate in this group and looking forward to future ones. And I know that Jim from Boulder was also going to speak, so I'll be brief here and just say that, as Amy mentioned, so the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, we're supported by the insurance industry. The analogy is our sister organization is Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, where they crash test cars, we crash test buildings. And our work focuses on natural hazards and these types of catastrophe events and how they impact the built environment. So that would be both residential and commercial. And we have, as Amy mentioned, a very unique facility which allows us to recreate these natural hazards at a full scale. That's unique in the sense that we know hail is hail, we know fire is fire, but things happen at different scales when we kind of talk about the physics. And so we have a large chamber where we can put a full scale 2-story single family dwelling and expose it up to a Category 3 hurricane to see how the different components fail. Likewise for the wildfire peril, which is what my work focuses on. And then just to kind of circle into the discussion about modeling and where the research at IBHS plays a role in that. In fact, some of our member companies, associate members, are those catastrophe modelers. So we know them, we work closely with them, but it's relevant to mention that we do not develop models. Our work focuses on the physical science, the phenomena of how things are impacted by the exposure from the hazards. And so we understand how different siding materials or different window designs can get impacted by different radiative or convective heat fluxes. And then so we say, okay, if it's multi-pane tempered, it's going to be better than single pane non-tempered. And then that information based on the science, based on the physics, can then be integrated into these models. So we really pride ourselves in and prioritize that we need the science basis to make a statement about a material component, and then that's what drives our work going forward. And then just to kind of cap it off to mention, so we are just having our 10-year anniversary, and we have a long history, and some of you may be familiar with some of the pictures and videos. And over the past 10 years, we have been working on different components of the structure. And at that same time, other organizations have been doing the same. And going forward, some of the things that we're looking at as critical is that when we talk about a building and its vulnerability to fire, and Amy, you're absolutely right, it's different than other perils. It really needs to be thought of as a system. And I see some fire service people here on the call, and based on some post-event things that I've done is that statistically, the likelihood is that if a structure ignites, it's most likely to result in being destroyed, which is different than, say, high wind perils where you can get some percentage of damage. And so the name of the game is to avoid ignition. And so the weakest link is one that we need to be concerned about. And so, yeah, that's very much an important part of our work going forward. And we're continuing to do work at the lab, socially distanced and safe in that way. And yeah, we're working with people on this call, and I'll be happy to take questions or hand it back over again. I know Jim had some time on the agenda.
Well, I'd love to give people a few minutes to ask you questions. And I don't mean to. I know we're going to cut Jim. So Jim Webster is one of the more popular people among us. I know he doesn't because he's got the one program in the country that people are really looking to as a model. So why don't we do this? Why don't we, are there any burning questions that anyone wants to ask Daniel for a couple minutes? Because I think we just have what we had Jim slated for today was not to make a presentation, but to really just answer some questions about his program. So we will definitely, for our next meeting, and you're welcome, folks are using the chat, and I love that. So please do use the chat. Are welcome to make requests for how you like us to structure the next meeting. But yeah, if anyone has some questions specifically for IBHS on how they're testing, I mean, he just gave us a little bit about how they're testing wildfire. Anyone want to ask Daniel any questions while we've got him? You can unmute yourself because I don't see.
Amy, this is Rosemary.
Okay.
Daniel, I am really interested in the connection, what connection you might make between the work that you're doing at IBHS and some comments that Amy made at the beginning of the discussion related to standards. I've looked at a lot of your videos. I've looked at some of your books on wildfire in California. But how do you translate that double or triple pane window into a standard, or has IBHS thought along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it, because I didn't mention it, but that's an important part of our work. So just for some context, my background is in engineering, and I actually, before coming to IBHS, worked at the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, which is a standards development organization. So I'm very intimately familiar. And that is actually a big part of our work as researchers and scientists at IBHS, is to translate what we know, using the windows as a perfect example, that multi-pane tempered windows are better than single pane untempered windows, and then to implement that into one, test standards or test methods, because that's kind of a generic statement. You know, manufacturer A and manufacturer B, they both make windows out of the same thing, but they might actually perform a little bit differently. So one, standard test methods, and then two, in the local codes that require, say, all right, well, here's the standard test method for, you know, calling balls and strikes of whether it's a good window or not. And then we're going to require in the code that you must use the higher quality of windows. That's how the process works. I myself and my colleagues are actively involved. In the state of California, we participate in the Office of the State Fire Marshal's Chapter 7A task force. And that's actually an active group right now. We're working to get our recommendation proposals for the 2022 edition, which is a whole fun game of standards. It's like 2 or 3 years behind. But we also participate on models like ASTM and ICC. So we're actively involved, and I can talk about that, talk about specific components. Again, I know this was kind of short, but if these are great questions, I can talk more about if you'd like more information.
Great. All right, I'm going to take one more question from Sue Piper, and then we'll get to Jim. And if people don't mind going a few minutes over, I'm sure that Jim, I hope Jim won't mind. Sue?
So I'm familiar with IBHS, and your stuff is terrific. Fires, however, deal with communities or neighborhoods, and maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you're dealing with one house, and if the house next door meets the same standards, it would perform the same way. But do you do any research of sort of like, you know, a block? Because fires hit blocks, and when we talk about fire breaks, we're talking about not just fire breaks around individual houses, but around neighborhoods.
Again, an excellent question, because you're all setting me up for talking points or for things that I work in daily. So yes, again, that's an excellent question. Kind of what I was trying to get with over the past 10 years, we've looked at individual components, the roof, the vents, the siding of the building. And now we know that the building needs to be considered as a system. And then to your point, exactly right, Susan, is that it's not a building in isolation. And a lot of times we have these exurban or suburban communities where homes are actually, you know, 15, 20 feet apart. So if we just use pretty typical defensible states guidance of 30 feet, I on my home cannot control the fuel within 30 feet because 21.1 feet away is my neighbor's yard, and what they do is their property. It's a challenging situation for sure, but it's one that we're very much leaning into. And in fact, earlier this year, we kind of leaned in with, based on what we know now, what we think about suburban community wildfire resilience, and we came out with a roadmap, and there's some information online. And moving forward, we are partnering with CAL FIRE. And just to mention, we work with other research organizations, NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, U.S. Forest Service. And I just mentioned this because we're looking at a very large scale project that's at a research level asking about structure separation distance, which is one of the big things you're talking about there, Susan, about, okay, my home, a cabin in the woods, when I have half a mile in all directions, I feel pretty good based on what we know. We can do the right things there. What about if I'm living in the Skyhawk community in East Santa Rosa? I mentioned that because I went out there after the glass fire came through, and the reality is there were some great homes, clearly where the homeowner did what they could. And not to put blame, but there's an example where the neighbor had a wooden fence, and that burning wooden fence then caused it. So it's this kind of, you know, community effect. There's a lot of social science. There's more than just a physical phenomena that gets into that. But again, great question, and yes, things that we're working on, but big challenges and things that we need to all work towards.
Right. So we know that bad fences make bad neighbors, just like good fences make good neighbors. All right. Well, let's do this.
Can I just add something for a second, Amy?
Please. Yes, please.
I mean, the work that David is, that Daniel's doing is really critical. That it demonstrates that homes can be saved and risk can be reduced and hazards can be modified and mitigated, you know, one home at a time. It demonstrates that brands and embers, you know, blown against a home that there are certain vulnerabilities that can be mitigated by hardening the home and by modifying the vegetation. And so this is critical to demonstrate to people so that they can pay attention. Ultimately, what saves a neighborhood is an entire community becoming fire adaptive. It's them embracing all of these other principles and things. But this piece is critical because it can identify how to harden a home in such a way that it can be defendable, it can resist, brands and embers, and it can stand after a fire. And it is being demonstrated post-fire by the surveys that are done, some of it from the CAL FIRE tool that they're using to map all these homes. And it can be demonstrated that these modifications can save a tremendous amount of homes. And so, we should not just throw up our hands and say, look, so we can do it at one home, but we can't do it in neighborhoods. It really is going to take an all-in, all of the above approach. And that is what fire agencies are committed to doing. And the public needs to get on board with these concepts and understand that these home hardening requirements need to be adopted to the built environment, what's already there. It cannot just simply, California cannot just simply apply it to new construction in WUI areas. It has to be done retroactively over time in the built environment. That is the only way that this is going to change. And I think that the insurance companies can recognize that when homeowners take these changes and make them that they're more concrete, and it will have an overall positive effect and help fire agencies suppress the fire. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and I think to Bill's point, what we really also need to emphasize is the need for the insurance companies to help provide the mitigation incentives to get us to that point. By providing those mitigation down the road to the house, they can provide mitigation back to the insurance policy, in essence, saving them and saving everybody money down the road. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Kim, and very much. And I hate cutting off discussion, and that's, as you can see, that's why we got so close to the hour here without giving Jim Webster some airtime. So first, I want to say thank you, Daniel, and thank you for confirming in the chat that you will participate in our next one, and we can sort of we can work together a little bit to structure the agenda there. To make sure that Bill and Kim and you, and whoever else wants to help kind of frame it right, so we can keep on connecting these dots here. And Daniel Zielinski asked in the chat, how will this work improve insurability? Well, that's a perfect, and affect rates in the WUI. It's a perfect segue. So Jim Webster, Jim, you're with us, yes?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much for your patience. And if we can just go like a little bit over, you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. So Jim, one of the most heartbreaking things about the last month with the fires in Colorado, where when I heard that 4 of your I hate to start with the bad news, but that 4 of the homes that your program, that Wildfire Partners, it's a wonderful program, were lost. And so I didn't want to really necessarily lead with that, but because the nub of the problem here is exactly what Daniel mentioned about that is the insurer's talking point in the legislatures is you can't force us to reward people, because if you can do everything that you can, and if your neighbor does nothing, it kind of wipes you out anyway. So Jim, if you could just, first of all, give us a very brief snapshot from your vantage point on is Wildfire Partners still on track? Because you are the one program that has managed to get insurance companies on board. So talk to us a little bit, and then let's tee you up for a follow-up as well.
Yeah, I mean, we did lose our first homes last month, as you mentioned, in a Left-Hand Canyon fire, but we are on track. We just completing our 7th year, we consider our home certification program. This is property level, independent, individual assessment, inspection, and follow-up, long-term mitigation as a success. Millions of dollars of mitigation, lots of activity from homeowners, and good partnerships with insurance companies and realtors and business communities, and all the partners in the area, the fire agencies and the governments. And so, the idea of working to reduce risk. Just to tie this in briefly to the discussion to make it relevant to the previous discussion over the last hour, we spent the 90s gathering data and quantifying risk for models. Years and years, thousands and thousands of hours, home by home, pages and pages of data collected per home, feeding them into models to try to quantify that risk. And one of our arguments to the insurance companies, we did that for 10 years, and it wasn't effective. There was some value in quantifying that risk, but the amount of money and time and effort to quantify that risk, we ended up losing a lot of homes in 2010 that were the lower risk homes. Even that's a very, very detailed level of data collection and modeling on site, pages and pages of things gathered. Right now, the models gather a relatively few number of variables. And that's why, this sort of ties it into Daniel's weakest point. Our assessments looks at all vulnerabilities on site, and we gather that information. And that's the message, that we have to look at those details. One story from this last fire, you look at this home, it had the right building materials, the right roof, the right siding, the right detail, the right building materials, survived that initial fire front, but some embers were smoldering around, and in many places they self-extinguished when they were on well-protected gutters and other vulnerabilities. But there's one vulnerability where the siding had some exposed plywood, and that home ignited. And Daniel mentioned, usually when a home ignites, we lose that home, but there actually happened to be firefighters there sleeping overnight, watching that home and put that fire out in that wall section. So the idea of gathering data for a model, we'll never be able to gather enough data to put into models to really accurately quantify that risk. That's why we really believe in this home certification process. We at the certification look at every vulnerability, and if we meet all those standards, we'll certify that property. So that's the main data point, that now instead of looking at 100 different factors that might be different for each individual home and try to put that into a model, what we do now is we've condensed all that into our certification process. So if you do that mitigation, if you mitigate those those major risks and those minor vulnerabilities, those key vulnerabilities, we provide that certificate. So we're on track. And the message with mitigation is we're not going to save every home. We've had great success in the past fires where we haven't lost homes, but we did lose homes in this situation. Some of those homes were on the smaller lots. We also saved homes. There was well mitigated homes that we worked with that were surrounded by the fire, saw a great deal of heat and did not ignite. And so we have both successes, and yes, we did lose Wildfire Partners 2 certified homes was the number that were lost in one certified home.
Oh, good. Only 2. That's
right.
okay.
But other homes were in the program and were in START. So we had a home that was just assessed, the month earlier, and it survived. But it really wasn't our survival. It was it was the firefighters that again spent the night preventing that initial ignition from consuming the whole home. So lots to talk about, but yeah, we are moving forward in partnership with lots and lots of mitigation with the homeowners and the partners.
So Jim, again, now the program, you're so popular, and because your program is inspiring hope, right? And I know when Supervisor Smallcombe and I and others were serving on this insurance subgroup, your program, you presented to us there, and frankly, I kind of was modeling the wrap concept on, well, let's do that in California, what you guys are doing. So you've got insurers that are on board, right? That the certification means something, right? When a home gets it in terms of their insurance situation, correct?
Yeah, and it's not a discount, it's insurability. So we've worked with a number of insurance companies and some of the larger representatives of groups. So we have recognition of the certificate in terms of insurability. There's no discount. No one's filed with our state level with the data to document that difference for a discount, but it's an insurability. And some companies recognize it for their current customers, and some recognize it for new customers as well.
Okay. And so when people ask you, and I'm imagining that the Bryant and his team at CDI have asked you, so I'm going to ask you the hard question. You know, what do you think we need to do in California to set up our own wildfire partners type of a program? What's the obstacle? Why haven't we done it yet?
I mean, in terms of demonstrating a track record, we can talk about concepts, and I spent, months and months talking about the idea first with insurers, but they actually have to see it implemented. So, there might be a concept that works that, we have professionals, former fire chiefs, former district foresters, people who really know the specialties. It's not like some of the contractors that are really low cost and might come by and take a quick picture. These are professionals who understand the science, who work with IBHS. And so they're on site working closely, but you have to have some type of track record. So that's in a sense starting, you can't start at a statewide level. We worked, starting at a county-wide level, and now many other counties are interested. Some have pursued it in part, and some have implemented, but you have to have a track record. A piece of paper, right now they're recognizing the certificate, and they see that piece of paper and saying, okay, that's insurability, but they have to see what's behind the piece of paper, that it means something. So there's got to be a track record in addition to the concept. We have lots of certification programs for different issues and different things that have some detail. A homeowner certification process, of course, is much different than certifying a business that has a financial interest in maintaining a certificate, like for organics or other certified products. But so you need some type of track record to see that there is risk reduction and the follow through. To promise to serve, when we do the customer service, we have a hotline with phone numbers and emails. We get calls and emails every day, all the time. We're there to answer them. We're not just there a month out of the year. It's not a part-time job, it's a full-time job. So it's part of that track record of doing the work to show that it's effective. So we had the people that, the insurance companies that sat on the sidelines to say, prove it first. Some adopted more early in the game than others, but there's got to be some type of track record to show that homeowners are following through, and there's just not I'm just not signing certificates and giving them to my friends just because they asked for one.
Right. Like a fake elevation certificate in a flood zone. Well, listen, this is so rich, and I know, and I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes and let people ask you questions. I'm going to commit that for our next meeting, we will coordinate to have a proper, give both Daniel and Jim a proper time slot to kind of be the focus and really dig in on these issues of, okay, so you must have standards, Jim, obviously, for which that are the basis of getting the certification. And for Daniel, and then I think, Kim and Bill and Paul, those of you who are in the professional firefighting business, I would like us to start to, again, focus on, well, what do we know about what works? And obviously what we know, what works is embodied in Jim's criteria for eligibility for a certificate. And then I assume, what we're learning about what works, we have a ton of information from the field, organic information from firefighters about what they've observed. And then we have the work that IBHS is doing. So I'm gonna promise that for our next meeting, we will focus on the two of you and just make sure we find dates that work for you guys. If people want to take a few minutes and ask any questions of either Daniel or Jim, particularly Jim, since he was the scheduled guy for the Q&A.
And I'll just add one more comment, that this is
Sure.
hard. There's devil in the details. This is a lot of work. And when you do this for 7 years, we've seen everything. So I don't want to imply that this is easy. It's possible, but it's not easy. But with that, I'll take questions.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could interject here, I'm Dan Turner. I'm with Cal Poly University. And you may not be aware, many aren't, that Cal Poly has a Wildland Urban Interface Fire Institute that's actually studying these very issues and has a very granular hazard risk model that starts at the landscape level, the community level, drills down to the neighborhood, all the way down to the parcel, and assesses the structure itself on the parcel, but also what we call property hygiene. What's the nature of the landscape? What's the nature of the debris field, if you will, around the home? Daniel mentioned setbacks, those kinds of things. Gives a risk score for that, and then you're able to look at an individual risk score for a parcel, but neighborhood risk score, community risk scores, and then what you can do about it. How can a person mitigate? What's the value of putting multi-pane windows in versus single pane? What's the value of in a mitigation score? So this is made up of about 20 to 30 faculty members at Cal Poly, from everything from forestry, fire science, to fire protection engineering, aerospace, city and regional planning, electrical engineering, kind of a whole scope. We also are partnering with CSU San Marcos, San Jose State, Berkeley, University of Montana, and other academic institutions on trying to look at the fire problem, the wildfire problem, but focus specifically on the built environment component piece of that, because that's where the consequences are the highest. Also looking at smoke management, atmospheric sciences, and so forth on what are the holistic look at the WUI fire problem from a structural behavior models, from human behaviors, the social side, the political side, all of those component pieces to see how do we move this problem forward, using science as that basis. So there's a good source for you for science. Daniel, we were kind of conversing on the side here. Cal Poly has the only fire protection engineering program in the Western United States. So that's their focus is the built environment, how structures behave in fires. What's their fire ignition resistance? What's their burn resistance? How do people behave in fires and so forth? So it's a good program. And at some point in time, I think Emily and I communicated about this a while back. I had to join late because we were actually on a faculty meeting, the WUI group, when this started. But we'd be happy to do a little short presentation about what Cal Poly does at one of your
Great.
future.
And
Thank
just to
you.
add in just another complicating factor, we talk about the structure and some of those, the science around ignition and also the vegetation. Another big component in this is the homeowner themselves and that education and empowerment. We can have a perfectly mitigated home and structure, and that homeowner leaves, evacuates, and leaves a window or door open, and that home still ignites. So the empowerment, the social science, as well as the natural sciences that we've talked about here, but in terms of, that's a big part of why we call it Wildfire Partners. Again, we can score, we can look at the structure and harden a home, but if the homeowner doesn't understand, how to evacuate and some of the other issues in terms of maintenance, so it gets more complicated as we go. We look at structures, we look at the vegetation, we look at emergency preparedness, but also that homeowner component and there's so many pieces to talk about.
Absolutely correct.
Any other questions for today for Jim or about Wildfire Partners before we wrap up? And with a commitment that we will be scheduling future meetings that will allow both Jim and Daniel and Dan Turner to all tell us what they can about the standards that we are that I think we need to get solidified here in California. Any other questions for these folks today? I see people are like me and then prefer a 1 hour meeting. Okay, so I mean, talk about an embarrassment of riches. We have phenomenal brain trust here from, you know, the Department of Insurance to, you know, to Wildfire Partners, to the, you know, to the fire chiefs, Western Fire Chiefs, Novato, and, you know, Supervisor Smallcombe, IBHS, Cal Poly. It's pretty mind blowing here. And it just sort of reinforces that, that there's a lot of will here to tackle the underlying imperative to get a framework in place, so we can start really trying to take advantage of insurers' competitive instincts at somehow when they feel a little bit more calm, which I think will come over time. It always does when we have these situations. So thank you all for your time and your attention. If you have feedback or complaints, you know, the doctor is in, Emily@uphelp.org. But also we will look forward to, after the holidays, reconvening in early January with a nice script, or at least a more give us enough time with some of these experts, so we're not just sort of jumping from thing to thing. But the unifying theme here is, I think we're all on the same right parallel tracks. We just have to keep on checking the boxes. And I think at some point, you know, maybe get some insurer voices in here to hear how sane we are, and how we're talking about standards more than standards for insurability more than forced discounts, which I think is sort of a hot, those are loaded words that don't seem to get us moving in the right direction. So, okay, thank you again, and all be safe and be healthy, and stay in touch with us, either Amy@uphelp.org, Emily@uphelp.org. But again, really, really great meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Amy.
very much.
Thank you all.